Brew Strong is brought to you by Blickman Engineering, home of the Riptide. Visit them online at blickmanengineering.com.
Brewers, it's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think, Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Ciao, homebrew community.
What's up, my homie brewers?
This is TC and Big Mike here on Brew Strong. And today we have with us our good friend Huggy Bear and special guest Michael Tonsmeyer of Sapwood Cellars. And let me get back to my notes before I get too off where I'm going. So briefly, because we're going to tell you a whole lot about Michael and what he does. What he does is he is, I guess I don't have your title, but responsible for everything sour that comes out of sapwood, which is saying quite a lot. Because the list of sours I've seen is just, my mind is still blown. I've taken my notes, I've written my questions, and I look at it and it's amazing. But today's show is about Mike telling us about his beers over at Sapwood and what makes them quality, what makes them what they are, and hopefully we get into how we can adapt that. So we have Huggy on here, ought to have some really tough questions, and Mike's going to ask the things that are probably on our minds, and I'm going to try to sit back and just ask the questions and look smart, keep my mouth shut. You know who else looks smart? You know who looks smart, Big Mike?
Well, that would be the folks over at Blickman Engineering.
That is right, because those guys are smart. And they've been our sponsor since day one. The smart guys over there. One very intelligent gentleman passed it on to another intelligent gentleman. Drew's over there now getting it all done. And I mean, when I need something for homebrewing, the first place I go to is Blickman and Anvil and see what they have that matches what I need. So I'm sure I can find most of what I need right from something that they are making, something they've thought about already. And right now, what they want you to know is if you're heading to CBC in Indy this month, that's their town. The Greater Lafayette area breweries have something exciting for you. It's time to explore and win. A scavenger-style raffle where you'll discover amazing craft beer and have a chance to score big prizes, like a $1,000 Blickman e-gift card, supplies, swag, and more. Swing by Blickman Engineering HQ from April 26th to 28th. Grab your swag bag and get your first raffle ticket. Then visit participating breweries to collect more tickets and boost your chances of winning. Man, I guess they're going all out. That's nice. Once you've got your tickets, I'm telling you, that's just part of it. Once you've got your tickets, drop them off at Blickman's booth, number 701 at CBC, April 29 through May 1 for a shot at the ultimate prize package. Make sure to follow Blickman Engineering on Facebook, Instagram, and X, as all the details will be dropping soon. Sip, explore, and win. Let's make this CBC one to remember. Also, if you're watching, you're going to know about this. And if you're waiting to listen to it, you might miss it. So you should watch us on Facebook. I'm sure you're going to get the email soon. I haven't got my email on this yet. This is my read for the show. And wow, okay. Mike, you going? You going to go to CBC this year? Or you got too much going on?
Too much going on. We've got kitchen opening, and it's been perpetually about to open for about a year. So last year, CBC, I said I'm not going because the kitchen might open soon. So
okay, I'll try not to laugh so much and comment not at all on that. Huggy, any chance you get to go to CBC this year?
Yeah, actually, they're sending us. So I'm with Flix, and we got 10 locations, and they're sending all the head brewers this year. And our national ops manager lives just outside of Carmel, so he's going to be there. So it's me pretty excited. I'm looking forward to it.
Very cool. Big Mike, any shot?
I have a baby on the way, so absolutely freaking not.
I need that, but
I get that part of the whole life journey, so I'm more excited about that.
Yeah, I'd like to go to CBC one day, and I really want to go with a pro brewery. You know, I'm sure that's the way you want to show up there. Huggy, you share your samples with me all the time, and I appreciate it. I'm about to brew with a bunch of them in next week, actually. That's we don't hear so much about it as home brewers, but I've been wanting to go for quite a while. I mean, think there's a lot more technology that rolls out at CBC than you get to see like GABF. No one's going to roll out technology. You just roll out a bunch of drunks. NHC, you'll get to see Anvil and Blickman stuff roll out, but not the big boy stuff.
Yeah, rumor has it it's coming to San Antonio in a few years.
Really?
I think in 2 years, next year, year after, I think. Year after next. I think it's Philly and then San Antonio.
CBC is yearly? Was it the competition that was every other year, but CBC was yearly?
Yeah. Now World Beer Cup is every year. It used to be every other year, but now it's every year.
Gotcha.
But yeah, CBC is every year as well.
They should do like every 4 years, like the actual World Cup. Then it's like big
the
time.
Olympics, yeah.
Champions. Like the whole thing.
So if you're going to CBC, you should be looking out for that. I'd love to be there looking, going to these breweries and picking up extra raffle tickets, etc., see what I could win, or just visiting the breweries. I love visiting breweries. It's such a good time. All right. So that's our number one sponsor, been with us forever. Be sure to give them some love. I can never remember the email address, but I bet it's on their website. Or maybe they're not pimping it as much because they're not checking as much. I might still go to John, and John's like, well, I'm retired. I don't want to use emails anymore. But Drew's there. Drew's doing a great job, excellent job keeping Anvil and Blickman not just going, but going forward. Great people over there. We had them on the show a little while back. If you missed that one, you should catch it because they really are good people to talk to. All right. So this might be a challenge, Mike, but it might be easy. Can you give us a simple definition of mixed fermentation?
Sure. I think the easiest way to put it would be it's the combination of different yeast strains. So I think you could probably draw that line at probably different species of yeast. So if you mix Conan and London Ale together, that's probably not mixed fermentation. Mm-hmm. But mixed fermentation would be Brettanomyces and Saison yeast. It could be Lactobacillus and a wine strain. It could be Pichia, Pediococcus, and 1,000 other microbes from a wild mixed fermentation that you don't even know what's in there. So I'd say that would be it. That it doesn't have to be sour. It doesn't even necessarily have to taste funky, but it would just be like a lager is a definition. A lager is a technical definition of the yeast.
Right.
Even if it's dry hopped and black, it's still a lager. I think when people start brewing, they think of lagers just being light and fizzy. I mean, when people start brewing mixed fermentation, they think of lambic or they think of sort of those classic styles, where I think mixed fermentation sort of maybe has a wider breadth than a lot of people realize.
But no credit for mixing 1056 and 001.
Exactly. And that might create something really, real unique and special and magical, but it probably wouldn't be mixed fermentation.
Right. Gotcha. Well, I like that definition. It's a generous definition. It's not.
Could it be like trans species? Like you got to get away. You can't do multiple Saccharomyces cerevisiae. You got to kind of put something else in there with a different taxonomic name.
I think that would be a fair way, as long as we don't just go Pastorianus or
Ovar. You got to get away from Saccharomyces. Yeah.
But it's not just like say I brewed an ale, but I wanted to finish it off with the lager yeast, maybe as a bottle conditioning. Even that's not quite mixed fermentation.
Yeah, and honestly, I'll say it's not something that has a group around it pushing a particular definition. Like there's Method Traditional, which is like the lambic style thing, which really has guidelines that have been drawn up, and people are very fiery about it. Mixed fermentation, I think, is, it's probably even more complex than that, because I think a lot of people wouldn't call, say, kettle souring mixed fermentation, because you're doing a staggered situation with sour mashing, kettle souring. You're doing souring in one step, pause, pasteurize, boil, and now you're moving on to the next step, traditional fermentation.
So not sequential fermentation.
Exactly. And so mixed fermentation, I think, to me, implies that they're in there together at the same time. And that could just be Lactobacillus and USO5 or 1056 or whatever. But again, it that runs the gamut all the way up to who knows what is in a full spontaneous fermentation.
No one yet.
Would you consider co-pitching like a hep yeast with English yeast or something like that? Would you consider that mixed?
I don't think so. I think we were saying that I think you have to have something non-Saccharomyces in there at a minimum. otherwise, and you could, I wrote an article for Brew Your Own magazine years ago about blending yeast strains and doing wine yeast with ale yeast and doing, those sorts of things. And that is a perfectly valid and interesting thing. But I think if you put that beer on tap and said, try my new mixed fermentation beer, people would be confused.
Yeah.
Well, probably most people wouldn't know what you're talking about, but the people who knew what that was might be confused.
So maybe if your Berliner is showing signs of Brett, that's getting towards a mixed fermentation style. You got some
Certainly.
lacto, you got some sac, and you got some Brett going on in that.
Perfect. And that's honestly, that's where I love Berliner Weiss. When we do Berliner Weiss, it's a full mixed fermentation, no boil, and then we pitch lacto, brewer's yeast, and Brettanomyces. Berliner Weiss is one of those styles that I think just as a base for fruit is fine, but maybe on its own as a plain Berliner Weiss, you need something else. It's just such a plain, simple style. And I love a little funk, a little lemon, a little something more interesting from the Brettanomyces and the Lactobacillus being alive and in there and working.
And I would say Kindle Berliner has that to it. When I had my Kindles, my first 3 Kindles, I had Mitt Green. I don't remember what the green is, and the Mitt Red. And I had plain. And when I asked for plain, they looked at me like I was nuts. But I was going to have it.
My wife had that exact same experience in Berlin, and they refused to let her try the beer without the syrup. Absolutely not an affront to our. You're a country built entirely around not adulterating beer, and you refuse to have people try beer without Woodruff or raspberry syrup in it.
There you go, the Woodruff, the green, and the raspberry. Yeah, so good stuff. All right, so that's an excellent definition. Let's go ahead and take our first break, and then we are going to get into you. Tell us a little bit more about you. All right, so coming right back.
Are you a home brewer who loves crafting your own beers but sometimes find yourself short on time? Or maybe you're a beer lover who's always been curious about home brewing but felt intimidated by the process. Well, get ready to raise your glasses because More Beer has just revolutionized home brewing with their incredible flash brewing kits. These kits are a game changer, designed for both seasoned pros and complete newbies. Imagine brewing exceptional beer at home with a fraction of the usual effort. We're talking 10 minutes of effort. That's the magic of flash brewing. Now, you know the traditional brewing drill. An hour-long boil, another hour for cooling. It's a commitment. But flash brewing completely rewrites the rules. We're talking about eliminating the boil altogether. Just mix and ferment. How, you ask? Let me break it down. Each kit includes pre-boiled and whirlpooled malt extracts, hop bite shots for bitterness without needing to boil, a blend of T90 or cryo hops, depending on the recipe, and the real secret ingredient, the specially formulated flash yeast, which starts quickly and produces clean beer that lets the malt and hops shine. The result? A delicious beer that will blow you away. All the flavor and satisfaction of a traditional brew, but in a fraction of the time. So whether you're a busy brewer looking for a quicker way to enjoy your hobby, or a beer lover ready to dive into the world of homebrewing, More Beer's flash brewing kits are the perfect solution. Head over to More Beer to explore the range of flash brewing recipe kits. You won't believe how easy and delicious homebrewing can be. That's morebeer.com.
Are you looking for a simple brewing system that's great for all grain brewing, but everything on the market seems to be full of compromises? Blickman Engineering has the answer. The Blickman Brew Easy All Grain Brewing System. The Brew Easy is a complete system with easy upgrades and a beautiful compact design, perfect for any size brewing location. At its core, the Brew Easy is built on 2 gorgeous Blickman Boilermaker brew kettles, a high-temperature March pump, and either a top-tier gas burner or the new Boil Coil electric heater. The Brew Easy adapter lid allows the pots to stack on top of each other, forming an efficient, strong, and compact brewing setup that comes in 5, 10, and 20-gallon batch sizes. Upgrade your Brew Easy system with full automated control by adding a Blickman Tower of Power temp controller, and make moving around easy with the Blickman Kettle Cart. The Brew Easy is modular. If you already own a Boilermaker kettle, you can build your Brew Easy by purchasing just the modules you need. The new Brew Easy all-grain brewing system. See it today at BlickmanEngineering.com and brew with Blickman quality on your new Brew Easy.
Back to the 2 guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
And we're back, and we have a quorum today. It's me, TC, it's Big Mike. We have our good friend Huggy Bear, and we have Mike Tonsmeyer from Sapwood Cellars here to talk about how he became what he is as a sour beer extraordinaire, and tell us something about some of his beers. So, Mike, before Sapwood Cellars, and about how long ago that was before Sapwood Cellars?
So we opened Sapwood about 7 years ago, and honestly, time flies. I just crossed over 20 years of since my first homebrew batch. I went to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh for economics. I took an awesome class my senior year. I just needed credits to graduate, beer brewing appreciation. I don't know if many of the listeners know about Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania's got better. But for a long time, basically the only way to buy beer was by the case from a distributor. Mm. And so the class coincidentally had 22 students and 2 instructors, student-led class. What a coincidence, 24 beers in a case.
Wow.
Nice.
And so my friend Nicole and I brewed, the midterm was a brown ale. The final exam was brew your own choice. We made a vanilla cream ale, very much inspired by Anderson Valley's solstice, summer solstice. And that really was sort of the bug that bit me. I've always loved cooking. My mother tells me about when I would watch cooking shows when I was 5 years old. My great aunt Edna would allow me into her kitchen to make an absolute mess with no recipe when I was 10 years old. And that's what I always wanted like chemistry to be. I always just wanted it to be like throw stuff together and see what happens. And then I took a real chemistry class. It was put it in the flask, add it 1 drop at a time, measure the pH, follow the instructions. And I love brewing because it has so much of that, but with you can do whatever you want that you think makes sense. And then you get to judge, did it work or not? Did you enjoy it or not? Did it fit the style guidelines, or do you not care that it fit the style guidelines? And so very quickly, I sort of jumped into that feet first. A good buddy of mine growing up, Jason and I started homebrewing together after college. I initially sort of applied to a bunch of breweries to try to get a job, and I got 1 or 2 interviews. It really didn't go anywhere. And so I'd also been applying for real jobs. And eventually I got one down in Washington, D.C. I was from Massachusetts, and I had a couple of months of unemployment before my job started at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so I decided, hey, I've always wanted to do sour beers. I've been trying to hunt down like a good example of every single style on Beer Advocate. Let's try a top 10 Baltic Porter, a top 10 English Brown, a top 10 Lambic. And then sort of as a homebrewer, I wanted to do the same thing, try brewing, maybe not every single style, but a representative something. And I'd always heard that sort of making sour beers is this huge risk. If you make sour beers in the same zip code, that Brettanomyces is going to come into all of your clean gear and cause awful problems, make all your beer sour. There's only like half truth to that. And so I did a couple of sour beers at my parents' house. I moved down to DC. I didn't bring my homebrew gear with me just because I didn't know what my living situation was going to be. I'd call my mom every couple of months and say, hey, Mom, could you like top up those airlocks? Could you take a look at them, see if anything's growing on top? I'd come home for Thanksgiving and, give my parents a hug and then go down the basement and take a look at them, pull samples. And in some ways, that's the toughest thing about sour beers is they tend to take a long time. And so kind of out of sight, out of mind is a really nice benefit. And then it just sort of grew from there. I started the blog, The Mad Fermentationist. I started consulting for breweries, sort of Modern Times most prominently, but other successful and now somewhat defunct breweries like J. Wakefield. I did a little work for Bottle Logic, a half dozen other places, Urban South, a bunch of startups that maybe never made it off the ground. And, really sort of, and I thought that was it. I really thought that was going to be this fun side gig thing with my government job. And I wrote the book American Sour Beers, sort of grew out of that. And I really thought that was like a nice hobby. And why ruin a hobby by turning it into a job? And then I was at a DC Homebrewers meeting, and I'd gotten to know this guy, Scott Janish, pretty well. And I was drinking just this absolutely amazing, I don't even remember what the hops were, it's a quinoa, hazy IPA. He and I were just hanging out. I was finishing off my second or third glass of this thing. I just went, man, if you ever want to open a brewery, just let me know. And like, I'd love to figure something out. And he goes, oh yeah? I've been working on a business plan. It's a little bit too much for one person to take on. And that's a really tempting offer. And I've been working on a book too. I love your advice on that. I went, oh no, what have I done?
He took you seriously. He took you at your word.
He did. And he has been such a fantastic co-founder. He has mostly sort of stepped out of the day-to-day brewery operations for the last year as he spins up the kitchen and deals with general contractors and electrical work and saving us money by building 45 tables for the tasting room and doing all the painting and the trim and all that stuff. And so it's really been a ride the last 7 years. And I think it's worked out really well because we both sort of have our little areas. He still deals with ordering all the hops and figuring out all that stuff. And I order the malt and I help with the barrels and the blending. And it's been a really unique, fun, special experience. And we still run it like we're a couple of home brewers. We put out 1,000 beers over our first 6+ years.
Wow.
1,000 different beers. Just like every week, we're doing different stuff. We do mixed firm, we do barrel aged stouts, we do kettle soury stuff, we do IPAs and lagers, and it ended up we got the second most medals in the Untapped Community Awards 2 years running. So last year we were right between Treehouse and Hill Farmstead, and so I don't necessarily put a lot of stock in Untapped, but if they put us between Treehouse and Hill Farmstead, I'll take it.
Company. That's good company.
Yeah.
And so you did answer a good question there, though. When to start learning how to do sours? This right before your wife has a baby. Big
Are
Mike.
you trying to say something over here?
Go ahead and pull up a carboy and get it stuck somewhere and forget about it for about 9 months or so.
Yeah,
come back
I have
to it.
this
See how it's doing.
I have this little 3-gallon brew bucket. I should probably throw something in and just let it forget about it. Like you're saying.
No,
It's making me want to do it. I'll tell you that.
that was my move as a home brewer. Is I stepped up to a 10-gallon system, and I would split batches. So I'd take half a Pilsner and turn it into a Brett Saison. I'd take part of a brown ale, and that's an Ode Brune. And you can really, even if you don't want to step up to say a 50-50 split, even if you can get 6 gallons out of it and go into a 1-gallon jug and pitch some bottle dregs from your favorite bottle conditioned sour, a yeast pack from your favorite brewery, ask a local sour brewer if they'll share their culture with you, whether that's a home brewer or a commercial brewer. And that really is an easy way to get your feet wet on something. What I would do is just use hand-me-down equipment. So when my hoses or my auto siphon started looking a little beat up, a little scratched, and it might be time to replace them after a couple of years, hey, that's your new sour gear. And then a couple of years later, when you replace that new set, that's your new hand-me-down sour gear. But I would keep that stuff separate. A soft plastic, anything that could scratch easily.
Very cool.
Awesome.
So that gets you through and to Sapwood. And so Sapwood's been open how long?
Well, 7 years coming up this September. So 6.5.
You mentioned the restaurant. Outside of the restaurant, how's the brewery? I mean, do you have space to grow?
So we started with about, I think, 7,500 square feet, and we're up about 40% over that. So we're actually just next week or the week after, hopefully, the tasting room is expanding by about 50%. And then, so we're opening a restaurant called El Buera Taqueria. El Buera is just Spanish for sapwood. So it was an easy extension. But really, it giving people a chance to try sour beers, whether that's on draft or bottle pours or whatever, I think is key, because I think sour beer is not mixed fermentation. None of those are as appealing as bourbon barrel marshmallow chocolate stout. Even someone who doesn't know anything about beer, you say bourbon barrel marshmallow chocolate stout, that sounds delicious. If you say Brettanomyces pediococcus saison, you're just not getting maybe the traction with someone. And so getting them in, and whether that's for food or for entertainment or whatever, just getting people to try these things. I think a lot of people enjoy them, but maybe are not, we haven't found the wording, and obviously like fruit, raspberry, cherry, those sorts of angles work well. But I think for mixed fermentation to sort of survive commercially currently, you need to have some sort of foot traffic.
Well, yeah, I can see that 100%. I mean, if I'm in my local specs beer stores around here, and I see a random 6 pack of IPA, and I don't really know that brewery, but I check the date. The date looks valid. Maybe I check on tap, see some ratings, and I'll pick up a 6 pack of that IPA. But if I see a random sour, it's not going to go the same way. You know, I'm
Particularly because that bottle of sour might be $25 or something like that. That's a big ask for somebody who has a lot of choices. And
so getting the foot traffic in the restaurant should get you even more foot traffic. Getting foot traffic in so people can taste the ones that they don't have to invest in the bottle necessarily. That might blow y'all up. That might be crazy.
I think there's also there's a story behind it. We'll talk about sort of the beers individually, but you can say, hey, I made a Citra Mosaic IPA. That's what we do. It's delicious, but is our Citra Mosaic IPA necessarily that much different than somebody in Chicago or New Orleans or LA? Probably not. We're all getting the hops from Yakima Chief. We're all using a lot of the same malts and yeasts and whatever. With sour beers, as often as we can, we're trying to source from, hey, that farm you get your cherries at from the farmer's market, that local distillery, that local winery that you enjoy going to. It's easier to make that sort of local, personal storytelling connection about those beers, usually.
Yeah, I am not on the right, what is this, latitude or longitude? I'm not latitude. I'm not at the right latitude for hops.
Yeah.
So not going to get that around here.
And often local hops are like good and interesting, but they're not necessarily fantastic.
Yeah. I was thinking, have you guys given any thought to getting away from even the term sour? I always feel like some of the best examples of mixed fermentation beers don't really necessarily feature sour. Sour is a piece of it. And so have you guys ever thought of, we should try to get away from that name and maybe even create our own term for this? Or has there been any movement on your guys? Have you seen any response from the public, even if you've done something like that?
We tried various different sort of phrases and things like that. So some of them, if acid is sort of one of the primary things, we tend to say sour. More of a truth in labeling thing is you don't want to have someone feel tricked that they didn't realize it was sour. So we made a mistake at one point of calling a beer de garde. Beer de garde, I know is a traditional style that's not sour, but there are a lot of great beers. Hill Farmstead does Beer de Norma, BFN does Bon Chien. There are a handful of others that just call themselves Beer de garde because it's beer for storage and it's a dark beer. And we had a couple of customers say, like, excuse me, this is not a Beer de garde. I know the BJCP guidelines. This is,
and that's why I wouldn't say ever call it a style that is not sour. It's like, could there be maybe a tweener that maybe we could find a term that, hey, this is a mixed firm, somewhere you're not really putting people off. Because I feel like in my experience, the term sour also connotes like, can you handle that? And a lot of beer drinkers, or they don't want that.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious from the source is like, have you guys played around with that?
We'll often describe beers more as tart or as snappy, acidic.
Snappy, I like that.
Definitely, like things like yeast and fermentation tend to not play great with the general public. And that's I probably, because I do our social media, I probably have that problem where I am speaking as someone who loves home brewing, who loves beer, who loves fermentation, who views fermentation as like a real thing. Like, I want fermented pickles. I don't want pickles that somebody dumped vinegar in. And so, like, me talking about yeast or fermentation, I think is appealing. I don't know that gets the traction that this juice bomb is loaded with citrus and tropical from, and not, we selected a yeast strain from Norway that is known for high ester production. And that's sort of the communication piece, which honestly, like, our fantastic bar staff, our GM Spencer, who is a home brewer himself and is much better at on the ground communication to someone who is hesitant. And again, like, the easy thing about being a brewery that sells mostly on premises is try it, have a little sip. That person next to you is trying it and you're asking questions. Here, have a half an ounce of the cherry sour thing. maybe you'll love it, maybe you won't, but the best you can do is get someone to have a sip with an open mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can feel that whole you have to watch the labeling thing, because and anyone who's listening and watching, fans of the West Coast style, you step up to a bar and you buy the IPA and it's not, and it's hazy. Like, you didn't say NEPA. You didn't. You said IPA.
Well,
damn it.
And I could even interject that the term hazy IPA now, a lot of beer people I talk to, they don't want, because they've had so many bad examples. And like, they've had those yeast bombs or the oxidized versions, and it's become a liability in their mind that when they go to buy something, they're taking a risk. And I think, how do we defeat that or diffuse that and let people feel like they can be, comfortable in there? So that's where that's where, for me in sour, like, I've had so many of these warheads that remember those candies, and like, somebody says sour to me, I'm like, what are we talking about here? So,
What's the pH? What's the titratable acidity?
yeah,
Right.
what are we doing here?
Yeah. So, Mike, do you
that's-
do external events to try to get people to get your name out there and get in front of people, educate people? Is that your biggest challenge, would you say, is like an education part, exposing people to the mixed firm beers?
Oh, honestly, a mixed firm is probably 5% of our production, something like that. I mean, I think it's a really important part. It's a really interesting part. It's a part that I'm passionate about. But the folks who are interested in it tend to know we exist and be club members, loyal customers, those sorts of things, or people who don't think that they're beer people.
Gotcha.
And so we try to do events when we can, but honestly, sort of the focus is on the tasting room and the people who are there, and maybe they've been dragged there by somebody else. We've done some farmers market stuff, and that's always sort of a good angle, I think, because some of the places we source fruit from are also there, and that's sort of, a push to them. But
But
yeah,
if you're doing like an event, a festival, you're bringing your flagships more so than your special bottles.
we don't have any flagships.
Yeah, remember 1,000 beers in 7 years, man. Come on.
We've done. We always have a pale ale. We always have an IPA. We always
Right.
have a double IPA. We always have a Pilsner. But yeah, we're a weird brewery, and I think the sour beers, like, one of my favorite things to do is to have other brewers in, rather than just like brewing a collab where we say, you like Citra, I like Citra. We do 17% oats. We do 14% oats. Let's try 15.5% oats. I love sensory stuff. So either bringing people in and like smelling hops together, or tasting our barrels, whether that's the sour program or the stout program, and just like tasting through them with really talented people. And then they'll just be like, oh, so like all these have the same culture. I'll say, oh, no, well, none of them have the same culture. We have different cultures in all our barrels. And I just get these wide eyes of like, what do you mean you don't have a house culture? And it's just, all our sours are basically totally based on us going into the cellar and tasting barrels, and we're doing a new batch, and then we find a barrel that we like the way it tastes, and then we pump some of that into the beer along with a little bit of yeast to get fermentation going. And so we're not about consistency. We're about like weird, seasonal, fun, unique stuff, because we're a bunch of home brewers.
Very cool.
Checks out.
All right. So I vote we take our next break and we come back and open up your first beer.
Perfect.
All right. Be right back.
Back to the beer guys that make other beer guys look like wine guys. Brew Strong.
All right, and we're back, and we are here talking mixed fermentation. We've got Big Mike, TC, myself, Huggy's on, a little in and out, might be having some technical difficulties, not sure. And we have Mike Tonsmeyer from Sapwood Cellars, and we are about to start discussing some of his phenomenal sounding beers. I can't wait. I've been staring at them in my fridge for far too long. And we're starting with Saison Nom, which, if you're watching, you can probably see the beautiful artwork. Probably can't read the label. Don't worry about it. It looks like this, and we're about to tell you what's behind it and what it tastes like.
Is that a 750 or 500, or I can't tell?
500.
500s.
Very nice. I like that.
Yes.
Bottle. I've always liked those 500 bottles like that.
All right, so I'm going to work on opening my beer. Do any of these happy bottles, Mike?
They shouldn't be. They're definitely supposed to be spritzy, but they shouldn't foam up on you. I don't think we're opening elliptical orbit. That's about as close as we've had recently to a spritzer.
Thanks for that heads up on that. So I'll be opening and pouring myself a sample, Mike, if you can tell us about Saison now.
Yeah, so I accidentally did a perfect segue into this one. This was a collaboration with Afterthought Brewing, Michael Thorpe, who is a super fantastic Saison sort of focused brewer in Chicago. He lived in the DC area 10 or so years ago, and we were a couple of home brewers and we hung out. And he was just like solely focused on mixed firm Saison. And so we've kept in contact, and he happened to be he's a lawyer in his sort of day job and happened to be in the DC area about a year ago. And we had him into the Sapwood barrel cellar and tasted a whole bunch of barrels. And he was really taken by one barrel that was pale ale. So we'll split batches again, like I was describing earlier. And a little of this pale ale went into, I think, a second or third use Calvados barrel, apple brandy, sort of house cultures. And then the other barrel that he was really taken with had been on Sauvignon Blanc grapes, and then into, I don't know, probably a fifth use Pinot Noir barrel. And he brought a whole bunch of his bottles, which I'm drinking one of tonight that he probably bought a year ago. So we grew up the sort of house culture he has going, added to both of those barrels, gave it another few months of aging. He pitched, we'd talk back and forth, and we ended up with kiwi berry. Kiwi berries are these little tiny, they're also called hardy kiwis. They have this amazing sort of tropical passion fruit flavor. And then we dry hopped it lightly. So I got the kiwi berries from Kathy's Kiwis, Wild Juniper Farms, which is in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I drove up, I met Kathy, she's lovely. She gave me a deal on seconds. We froze them just to break down the cell walls after letting them get as ripe as absolutely possible. And then sort of that last final dry hop with Wakatu, which is what Mike Thorpe from Afterthought suggested. And so the idea was it's just a totally unique beer. We're sort of layering the Sauvignon Blanc grapes, the mixed fermentation. One of those base beers had a little bit of Nelson in it. The kiwi berries, again, have that passion fruit thing, which you can also get from Sauv Blanc. You can get that from New Zealand hops. And so we're sort of pushing everything in that same direction, but probably with almost 2 pounds per barrel of whirlpool hopping and then a pretty light dry hop on top of that. And the goal was something that was like light and bright and tart and fruity and a little hoppy, just like a really unique beer. And that's sort of, I wish I could make beer that tasted like Cantillon. I can't. And so my goal is like make beer that tastes the way I want it to taste from my microbes and my cellar and my constraints and all those things. Because I don't have a cool ship in Brussels. I don't have a 100-year-old steam-powered, machinery.
The belts. I don't know how they have any fingers left. Those belts that run the machinery. You slide them on and off to turn the pumps on and off and stuff. Yeah. It's
a museum.
But so your description of the beer, well, first you gave us so much to unpack. But yes, this is an outstanding beer. It's light, it's crisp, it's fruity. I taste and sense almost everything you said on the first sip, which means as it develops, I'll get even more of it. This is very tasty. And jumping all the way to the end, don't knock yourself necessarily for not making Cantillon. Not all of their beers are as approachable as you might like them to be. I mean, they make some phenomenal beers.
So I'd be curious, how pronounced is the mixed fermentation of that? Is it leading the way? Is it a second fiddle? Is there some kind of hoppy flavor fighting with it or balancing it or playing with it? Or I'm really curious because
let's try to go through it, and I'll try to tell you what I sense as he describes what he's done to make this beer, Mike. And I think it'll answer Big Mike. I think it'll answer some of your questions. The hops are not interfering with the beer at all, and
I've been surprised, and we were sort of touching on this in the pre-show. The hops, I think, bring out the funk. Early on, so as a home brewer, I would do these hoppy saisons where I would do like a quick mix fermentation for, say, 4 weeks with a bunch of kettle hops. I really loved them. And when I moved up to the brewery, I got nervous. Hey, we're going to fill all these barrels. I'm just going to go with 10 IBUs at the start of the boil, and our beers were just sort of bland. And I know that there are hop Brett interactions. I know hops inhibit lactobacillus, but I don't know how much of what I think of as traditional Brett Funk fruity flavors are really either aged out hops and or some combination of Brett working on hop compounds. And that's like, as we've gone higher hop levels, I find the beers to in fact be like more mixed fermentation rather than less mixed fermentation, if that makes sense.
Higher hop levels in the kettle or in the dry hop?
Kettle. Although we've also played around with Gareth Young is an absolutely fantastic brewer. I'm going to butcher the name, Apocal Ales. They're outside of Glasgow, Scotland. And he does these like weird barrel fermented things where he puts whole hop cones in the barrels because there's a English IPA tradition of that. And he swears, I think he is entirely correct, that there's like the hop creep thing. And apparently there's old Scottish textbooks talking about hop creep, the enzymes from the hops are freeing sugars, as encouraging Brettanomyces, as helping that secondary fermentation, because you're slowly freeing up sugars that are then encouraging the Brett to keep working.
This is the opposite of everything I'd heard about hops. So you would know better than I would for sure. Mike, you the same? I mean, I always said, you got to watch the hops. It's going to inhibit all this, everything you want to happen if you're doing a sour.
Brettanomyces is a yeast, so it's not going to be affected by hops. So I would say the antiseptic qualities of hops are not really involved in this, but I do see that the three hooping of the hoops, it helps it push the Brit. Sorry, that was my Scottish. But, I could just imagine like for 100 years that the beer tasted better when they did it. So they just did it. And like, that's so cool to hear.
Well,
like, up in the Highlands.
And we were complaining earlier about these beers getting too sour. And so having more hops in there, it's that beer is, I think, still to me about as sour as I want it. The pH is in the 3.3s. That's sour enough for me.
I can see that.
Right. Yeah.
And so that for me is, and that's also what we learned. And I know Jay from Rare Barrel had these sort of struggles as well, that like you start out with one hopping rate and your bacteria get used to it. And so then you end up getting more sour. And he was super open and super helpful when I talked to him about, getting that hop rate up early before your beers get more acidic. The real issue we ran into was the beer would not be too sour. We'd put it on these high fruiting rates, and both the simple sugars of the fruit, the acid in the fruit itself, and then also the fact you're now diluting the beer. So say you were at 10 or 15 IBUs and you add 3 or 4 pounds per gallon of fruit, you're diluting the IBUs by that same percentage. So now your IBUs are dropping from 10 to 6. But now the yeast, the bacteria that have been fighting against those IBUs for a year, you've given them a reprieve and a big meal.
Weight off. Yeah. I like to think too is there's 8.3 pounds per gallon. So if you're doing 3 pounds per gallon, you've now almost diluted by 40%. Like you've taken a huge dilution there. And then to think, like, I know you said you freeze a lot of fruit, but if you throw straight fruit into this, you're also adding more bacterial load.
Yeah.
If it's fresh. So
and particularly bacteria that were really happy on that fruit. And fruit is already low pH. And so sort of our stopgap method for a while was I started buying either tetralone, hexalone, the reduced alpha acids that you can get, or I found even better was Hopsteiner makes an alpha extract that's just alpha acids, which are a lot lower perceived bitterness, but have very similar antimicrobial properties. So, and I'll still do it. If a beer is as sour as I want it, I'll add a little alpha extract along with the fruit. And we're repitching rehydrated wine yeast, usually selected to accentuate whatever fruit character we're going for. But then that stops that bacteria upwelling. And so that's a great move if you're sour enough. If your beer could use a little bit more acid, add the fruit, taste it after a week, taste after 2 weeks, taste after a month. And if it starts getting, there, you could throw in a little dry hop. You could throw in a hop extract. You could throw in a little, if you want a little hop aroma, toss in a little bit of incognito, toss in a little bit of, something that maybe has a little flavor to it. If you want to be totally neutral, and honestly, the Hopsteiner alpha extract, I think it's, $25 a kilo. It's very inexpensive just because it's alpha acid. It's baseline, nothing special.
Is that isomerized or
that's not-
non-isomerized?
Non-isomerized.
Non-isomerized.
Yeah, but I assume it's in some sort of aqueous media that makes it more dissolvable than alpha acids traditionally are.
That's
Yeah,
what you would call that.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
and it's interesting of using the alpha acid to stop the bacteria growth, kind of like you use the potassium sorbate to stop all the yeast activity. Instead of the yeast, now you're trying to inhibit the bacteria. So it's kind of like another weapon in your tool belt kind of thing.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
using the IBUs as your lever on how your funk is developing, how your
And that's
bacteria
exactly it.
specifically. Yeah,
That's
that's
sort of-
interesting.
That bought us time to do more of these beers that have more kettle hopping, more hot side hopping.
Mm.
And now that's become much less of an issue. We'll still add it if I'm nervous about or whatever, but that was a great tool. And that's one of the big drawbacks of mixed fermentation is it takes a long time. For us, some places turn beer quicker. We're about 6 months at a minimum, and a lot of beers are 12 months, 18 months. You figure something out. You've got 18 months, you've got 80 barrels already filled that you've got to figure out how to deal with. How do I blend this? How do I treat this to get the best possible product? With a sour beer program, you are home brewer, professional brewer. If you're not dumping beer, you need to taste more beers and work on your palate. And I had brewers early on tell me, again, like places, particularly if you're working on spontaneous, Allagash told me they were dumping basically all their beer for 3 or 4 years of the Cool Ship series.
Wow.
That's a lot more challenging dealing with spontaneous fermentation. That is a long learning curve. Other brewers told me maybe 25%, a third. We're a little less than that, but it's always a little backdated because there's some barrels I know I have to dump, and it's just like it's easier not to dump them.
Or you're
It's
like,
okay to dump
you're just
barrels,
like,
oh,
maybe.
But it also it feels bad. It's and what's I hate to hit a sore subject. If you don't sell your stock, it's not a loss. And it sort of feels like that sometimes with sour beer. Like if I don't dump it, it's not, I don't have to mark it as on my spreadsheet. No good.
Now I was gonna ask if you had any that you had to dump and you hadn't dumped yet, or some stuff that was in your back stock that you're waiting for the right day, but you're pretty sure you're just gonna have to cut your losses at some point.
The problem that I really have is that the sour beers it's a small part of production, and so it's not as much of a priority as it should be. And there's nothing worse. I was an economist in my former life, to look at that spreadsheet and taste a barrel and go, oof, this is over the hill. And they'll check my notes and it says 6 months ago, wow, this one tastes great. Starting to get a little bit sharp. Better find a place for it soon. And now it's I missed it.
It's pretty heartbreaking.
And that's the problem with sour beer is it's easy to say, wait a week. If you're dropping a cone on an IPA, you can't wait a week or two. It won't be fine. With sour beer, you can wait a week. You can wait 2 weeks, but then it's easy to wait a month, 6 months.
Yeah, don't wait to 6 months. Yeah.
And that's it. It's something that rewards frequent tasting, maintenance, thoughtfulness.
So to follow up with kind of that finding the right amount of sourness, have you ever used anything like a sodium bicarb to try to correct the pH if you're too low? Just because the beer's red, it's beautiful, but it's just a tiny, it's like 3.0. I want 3.3. Bring it up with sodium bicarb. I've actually done that with a fruited hazy. I did pineapple and it kind of grenaded, it consumed all the alkalinity and kind of grenaded it down to 3. And I'm like, I need to be back up. I want to be more in that hazy 4.6. I brought it all the way back up with sodium bicarb.
No, you've done exactly that. Both, again, this is stuff that happened, I would say, relatively early on. And again, that was one of those. We had a beer that was about 3.4, 3.5 pH. It was a collab with an awesome local brewery. They tasted the barrels. They gave us the culture. We decided we were going to do peaches and apricots, and went on the peaches and apricots. And the pH went down to 2.85, which is just absolutely undrinkable.
You can clean stainless steel with it.
And we did that as well on a pale ale with passion fruit. The passion fruit alone brought it down to 3.3 or something like that. In both cases, we did potassium bicarbonate, which so we didn't want more sodium. You do have to be careful if you're doing that because that is not far off of a homemade science fair volcano. You do produce carbon dioxide by mixing bicarbonate and acid. It helped carbonate the beer. We closed it up and it was cold and we mixed it in slowly. And in both cases, it raised the pH more than it limited the sourness. And I assume that's something about pH versus titratable acidity and which acids it was neutralizing. It helped, and maybe we could have added more or whatever, but we got them up to pHs that were sort of as I expected them, but they still had a more acidic presentation on the palate. And that's something
interesting
that we have luckily been able to avoid since then. And so I haven't sort of revisited it. In the same way, we had an early blackberry sour early on that was one of my first homebrew sours was Jamil's Flemish Red. And it didn't end up quite as sour as I wanted it to. And so I bottled half of it as is. I put blackberries on the other half, and really nice tart blackberries. And that was just like one, still it's, the balls are long gone. One of my favorite beers I've ever brewed. And we had something similar happen to us. We did 4 barrels of a strong sour red. 2 of them were sour enough. We bottled that as is. I love that beer. And then the other 2 went on to blackberries, and we add a little bit of lactic acid to that one just to boost it up. The commercial batch, the blackberries we got just weren't as tart as the ones I'd gotten as a home brewer. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it is something I try to avoid when I can because I would rather have the acidity come from. And now that we have a deeper barrel sour, we'll keg off if a barrel goes a little too sour. We'll keg it off and we'll mark acid beer for blending or whatever. And
because I remember, kind of it reminds me of when kind of a beer doesn't have enough body, you can do things like add maltodextrin or, there's levers you can pull to kind of bring it back from the dead. But that's interesting to hear that it's kind of not really a part of that.
Well, as a brewery with a lot of barrels, I had blending options. As a home brewer, things like that make a lot more sense when you probably have one carboy with a particular base beer in it. You just may not have those levers to pull.
Right. Cool.
So I'm going to try to unpack it a little bit if I can, because it's such a complex beer.
You still taste it over there.
Oh no, forget about it. I could just drink. Yeah, never mind. But it's really, really tasty. And so you stepped through this. This started off as a hazy pale ale.
Yeah.
Did you have intentions of souring a hazy pale ale, or is that the beer you selected after you? So you brewed a hazy pale ale with intentions of sour.
So it's something we do. Again, we're a small brewery. We do a lot of split batches. So sometimes that's splitting half an IPA and adding citrus zest and vanilla beans to it. And sometimes it's just like we don't need 20 barrels of pale ale a month. So we'll peel off 2 oak barrels. And then for us, sort of what I liken it to is painting. If you're a painter and all you have is green paint, you can't paint a sunset. As a blender, if all I have is one particular base beer, one microbe selection, I can't, it all tastes the same. There's no way to blend it. And so for us, it's getting unique things in there. We'll fill a barrel with Kentucky Common. We'll fill a barrel with Dunkelweiss. We'll fill a barrel with, because essentially it's beer we don't necessarily need. This is beer that might sit in a keg for an extra month that we don't need. Might as well fill a barrel, toss some microbes in there, and see what happens. And sometimes we're wowed and amazed. Sometimes it gets dumped. Sometimes it's a unique blending component, and maybe we learn something from that. And so the pale ales have worked surprisingly well. We do a 3-year blend, and the last one we do every other year. The last one of the 4 barrels was the closest thing we had to a flagship, our all Citra Pale Ale Rings of Light that had been a barrel for a year. It had this amazing, funky, citrusy uniqueness, a little bit of bitterness, but once you blended that with the other sort of 3 more traditional, mixed firm, turbid mashed, aged hop, whatever things, brought this bright freshness and balanced out some of the harsher acidity. And so the answer is we now regularly fill barrels with pale ale, or if the souring tank is half filled because we filled a couple barrels already, we'll pump a couple of barrels of pale ale over into that and blend it, and then that goes into barrels. And so
I'm glad you take good notes.
we do.
There's a lot going on here. So this one, then your wine grapes and Crow Vineyards, is that local to your area?
Yeah, they're fantastic. And Scott drove up there and got a bunch of Sauv Blanc. We did a carbonic maceration, which is you just leave it in the tank uncrushed for a week. They split open, and then so we put the beer into that tote onto the grapes pre-barrel. So it was right out of the tank with the yeast still going in the barrel, then into a barrel for 6 months or so before blending.
They start fermenting on their own yeasts. That's the carbonic maceration.
Yeah, and that's I don't tell the TTB that, but yes,
it's common.
Okay.
It's common in winemaking.
Yeah.
They do that a lot.
So we can just ask everybody. So you have to save your TTB, and you're watching this. That's the law. You have to save your TTB.
This is a fun story.
and
Tell me, dear cop.
as a home brewer, what I would just do is buy a bottle of New Zealand white wine and dump it into the keg. That is like, as a home brewer, that's what you're allowed to do, and that's what you should do. Because you can taste it, you can blend it to taste, and that's going to get you a much more consistent, unique, interesting result than local wine grapes at that scale.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And I would say for people, I've kind of dabbled in wines and winemaking, and to find the grapes that these winemakers of these vineyards, oh man, you're not going to get it better. As a home brewer, your best bet is to find a wine you like, and that's kind of got to be do that. Don't go buy like kits with like processed wine extracts and things like. Just go get a good bottle of wine and let it rip.
And that's a fun thing to do too. Like even if you just happen to drink a bottle of wine, like blend a little with whatever you have on tap. Try a little white wine in with your hazy IPA. Try a little red wine with your stout.
Oh yeah.
Because that's the fun stuff of being a home brewer. And if you like something, now you can sort of, scale it up.
That's what I always brag about with my pro brewers that I know around here is they're like, "What are you doing?" And I tell them, and they're like, "Huh."
Yeah.
Right. So how far along were you before Michael Thorpe came to visit?
So the beer was in barrels. So it had been in barrels. None of this had any intention of being an afterthought collab until he showed up and tasted a whole bunch of barrels and keyed in on these barrels as having flavors, lemony brightness, dankness, fun, that he really liked. And then the discussion happened on, do you just want to leave them as is? Do you want to add fruit? Do you want to add dry hops? Let's get your culture in there and see what happens. And so to me, like that's the part that matters with a lot of this mixed ferm stuff. It's not the mechanics of filling the barrel or whatever. It's the tasting it. And then it's not the same when you brew an IPA, there's a plan. Here's what we're dry hopping with. When it hits this gravity, we're capping it. When it hits, with mixed ferm, even for a Cantillon, they're not brewing a Creek base and a Rosé de Gambrinus base and a St. Lambanus base. They're brewing lambic. And then they're tasting that. And this needs more time. That's going to be the Purcell's Grand Cru. This is good as is. It's not, maybe it's reached its limit. Let's blend that into this. This needs some more acid. It's not quite as interesting as it should be. Let's put on some raspberries. This one is really weird and unique. It tastes like mangoes. Let's do a mango sour.
Oh, man.
Are they selling their best goose as goose, or are they selling their worst goose as goose and saving the best for the blends? We don't know. They're not going to tell us.
Well, and I could say that reminds me of like Scotch blenders, and where this has gotten so far away from scientific. There's a guy in a room smelling things and making decisions about which barrels are going to go with which. It has gone so far away from science to just almost, it's a pure artistic expression of your guys' palates. And I think that I'm over here just like in awe. That is the artistic peak of beer making, is where you're blending and mixing and tasting and deciding, and these things are happening without any kind of, like you said, plan. Like that's awesome.
I'd say going back to sort of the paint allegory, it's not about best and worst. It's about like what color works best. And the idea is that you get enough colors that the beer and so for example, dry hopping a beer reduces the acidity. Dry hopping raises pH.
Right, raise pH.
Yeah. And so if you have a beer that is delicious, but it's a little too sour, dry hop it. If you have a beer that's delicious, but not sour enough, fruit. If you have one beer that's too sour and has this really fun lemony funk, and another barrel that's not sour enough and has a really fun bergamot flavor, try blending them together at different ratios until you get the acidity that you like, but then also
that's so cool.
Yep. And that's so the answer is like, there is bad beer. There's vinegar beer. There is bad autolysis. There's all sorts
of warheads. Yeah. And clean stainless steel, clean your dry.
There's some things that should go down the drain, but for a lot of things, particularly at larger blending volumes, you can put something in there as 5% of a blend or 10% of a blend. We're small enough, few of our beers get over, say, 3 or 4 barrels. If it's not really good, I don't want it in my blend.
Right. You have to be critical on the quality.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to hide. Maybe you could if you were larger, but you're not larger. There's no hiding. It's either good or it's gone.
But I think that's what also gives us like a more unique flavor. That's not a 30-barrel blend. It's more select.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's good. Whatever it took to get here is what it was the right process. It's outstanding.
I love that. Sorry, real quick. There's a quote that just because we're on Brew Strong and it's Jamil Zainasheff has said this 100 times. It rings in my head every time I make a beer. There's one of two things going down the drain: that beer or your reputation. And that's where, whenever I'm tasting something and I'm trying to, you got to be honest with yourself, and you put something out that, it's like a couple bad reviews and that's it. Like I've always kind of felt like that. So that's all. That was my little 2 cents from Jamil, from his echo from the back of my head.
So stepping through this process and what I've heard, this isn't where you started off. This is where you ended up. And I want anyone listening to take that. This you didn't plan to make this beer as complex as it was, but it went through so many steps and it's coming out phenomenal. So you don't have to create the master plan on day one. Follow the beer where it goes. So Michael Thorpe came in with his house saison blend. That's his base beer, or that's his base yeast.
He uses that yeast for everything. Okay. He bulk conditions with it, and so he gave us a bunch of bottles, and I borrowed his yeast with his permission.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so that's how that happened. So you took some dregs and you put it into your barrels. Because so when I opened it, I smelled saison.
Yeah,
gently, and I liked smelling that, and I was happy to smell it because I like a good saison, a good crisp saison. I love it.
Yeah.
So then you come back with the kiwi berries, and so you add wine yeast. I'm going off your notes, thankfully, because I don't know all this stuff. And so you're re-fermenting, so to speak, with the kiwi berries in there and the wine yeast in there and house saison blends in there. So
I'm a big believer in getting yeast going. If you put old beer onto fruit, it might just sort of sit there and fester for a while. Mm-hmm. Having something ready to go, eat up those sugars, protect, if you're getting oxygen in there, eat up that oxygen, keep it secret, keep it safe.
So the bacteria will do it, but it will take a long time. And again, it's not going to eat up your oxygen immediately. So having some yeasts or wild stuff that's more active than just your simple bacterias, you want that layered in there with it. That's interesting to know also. And also, it seems like if you're not careful, because your yeasts are more likely to go dormant. Bacteria, you can't kill that stuff, but yeast still go dormant on you, so they're not even doing their job when you want them to. So you got the brand new house blend, saison blend dregs. You got some wine yeast in there now too, and you got this juniper, and then you dry hop.
Yeah, so we dry
That's
hop.
mind blowing.
We dry hop right before packaging. So
really?
Literally, like in a homebrew equivalent, it'd be like putting it into a bucket with hops and priming sugar, giving it 24 hours, and then packaging right off of there. A very light touch with Wakatu, which is a much more subtle hop. It's sort of in the shadow of the Motuecas, the Rawakas, the Nelson Savins. We work with freestyle hops, which is absolutely fantastic. But it's the same thing on the hoppy side. Smell the hops. If you like the way it smells, use it. And in this case, Mike had suggested this this hop as sort of like limey, but without the sort of big over the top tropical thing. It really worked out nicely.
So you're dry
Nice.
hopping that cold. Are you getting any? You getting the characteristics you like from that cold dry hop?
We could talk about hopping all night, but we dry hop everything cold. We dry hop
cold.
everything at 34 degrees.
Really?
Yeah, that's
I've not had good success. I'm doing something wrong. I have to do warmer or I get too grassy.
The answer for us was we needed more agitation. So it's the hops tend to just want to settle to the bottom at really cold temperatures, and so we put a lot of effort into keeping them in suspension. And for us, it's just like a brighter, fresher flavor. And it definitely has a little of that, like, let's say, nose in the hop bag, raw sort of thing initially. But a lot of that tends to sort of calm down after a week or so. And when you're bottle conditioning for 6 weeks before you release it, we want it to be sort of as bright and fresh as possible.
He's talking about the mixed fermentation beers, right? Like this is how you're doing.
All of them, like our hazies, our mixed firms, our West Coast Pilsners,
Okay. Yeah, I followed the Scott Janish new IPA 58 degrees. Is that still happening at Sapwood? Or?
No.
Yeah, I was gonna say it is. Wait a second. He said no.
That's the problem with books. So I think you may have it in there that there are sort of studies that showed that linalool and some other sort of the fruity compounds get extracted at about the same rate at 40 degrees versus 60, but the myrcene and the polyphenols and some of the other sort of like harsher compounds don't get extracted quite as nicely, quite as quickly at those lower temperatures. Part of it for me, like I'm a big believer in like tasting my beers next to really fantastic examples of the style from other breweries. And when we were dry hopping warmer and agitating as much as we needed to really have the hops in suspension, I just would always say our IPAs had this like a harsh, stick to your tongue, polyphenol, tannic sort of thing. And so we went from 58 to 50 to 40 to 34. And that character kept getting less and less and less. We did have to keep rousing more and more and more, but that
You're
was
rousing.
what, yeah. So we
You're
have
cold, you're rousing. And what's your duration on that dry hop?
about 24 hours.
So yes, so you're still keeping it down to just to a day.
And rousing
got some
will
bottle
strip
conditioning,
those alkenes. So I was saying rousing will strip alkenes and non-polar terpenes. So you'll get less grass.
Yeah. And so we're aggressive. We have like a high flow regulator, and so we'll bubble CO2 through it. We've played around with pumps and other things, but rousing with CO2 is just sort of like a safer, easier procedure for us.
Yeah.
Without having like a really great diaphragm pump or something like that. That would be really confident wouldn't be introducing oxygen or
peristaltic.
And so really the answer though is that like a lot of how we treat the mixed firm stuff was very much informed by the absolute tyranny that Scott and I hold over oxygen ingress on the hoppy stuff. Like, you know, if you have an oxidized IPA, and so like if we do a transfer, we fill a tank up with water and we push that water out. If we are hooking up a CO2 nipple to something, we purge out the CO2 nipple 10 times. If we're adding hops to a tank, it goes into a doser, it gets purged out, it gets burped out 10 times. We're crazy about oxygen.
Awesome.
And honestly, for a long time, like I had hoppy sour beers from breweries that I immensely respect that tasted like mediocre old shelfy IPAs. And I didn't want to do it. And Scott kept pushing for it. And I said, hey, if we're going to do it, we're going to treat it like it's a hazy IPA. And it preserves those bright, fresh, fruity aromatics without it tasting. I think as brewers, as homebrewers, we're also keyed into what a fresh beer tastes like, what an older beer tastes like. And I want my beer, even if it's in a bottle, it's a mixed firm, to taste fresh and bright and lively and not remind you of an IPA you had 10 years ago that was sitting warm on a shelf in a bottle that was okay. It's interesting.
Chewy.
Yeah.
Dry hopping or not, your oxygen, you're concerned about oxygen dry hopping or not.
Yeah. No, at every step we purge our barrels for 20 minutes. We are always repitching yeast. So like for bottle conditioning, we're generally Premier Cuvée, which is not a sexy yeast, but it is hardy and aggressive and all those things that you don't have to worry about. There are some great papers on acclimatizing Cal Ale, so it could get through a re-fermentation. I don't think you should be re-yeasting with Cal Ale in a beer with a low pH. I think you should be using wine yeast, which has been bred and selected for those conditions.
Yeah,
We
high
have a
glucose, low pH. Yeah.
We have a counter pressure bottle filler. It's not the quickest or the easiest or the best filler. It's from Express Fill. It was reasonably priced. It purges the bottles. It fills under pressure. We don't have one of those trough fillers that's filling on with the bottle, the unpurged bottle up, which can work. And if you're doing a really traditional, dark sour or something, it may not make a big difference. If you're trying to turn around a bright, hoppy, fresh, fruity beer, the more oxygen you can avoid, the better.
Right.
Yeah. This beer, no oxygen. This beer, nice crisp. I think I have a couple more questions. It's so much going on here. I love it. Let's take our last break, come back, and wrap up this beer because we have 2 more beers to talk about.
Uh-oh.
So, all right, we'll be right back.
Learning to brew has never been so disgusting. This is Brew Strong.
And we're back. And if you don't know what this one's about, I don't know how you got this far, but we are talking mixed fermentation with Michael Tonsmeyer, Mike at Sapwood, who makes outstanding at least one beer. And I'm looking so forward to a couple more here. It's amazing. I'm hoping we get a litany of questions on what we're discussing here, because what you've done to me is impressive. And I love the fact that, because it's daunting, I think, if someone says, let me try to make a recipe like Sapwood Saison Nom from on paper right now. You didn't do that. You started off with a couple steps and you let the beer go where it went, and you figured out where you wanted it to go from there. You did another step, and for this beer, you took no wrong turns and it came out with an outstanding beer. I'm not saying that with enough emphasis. I love this beer. I have one question straight about the beer. So 3.3, it has a sweet flavor to it, but it's not sweet, obviously. It's dry, but the fruit's popping too. And that seems to be a challenge in some sours, is sometimes you have to drop the pH to get a little more of the fruitiness out of it. And here, 3.3 is not seriously sour. 3.3 is a nice place to be. And the fruit that you're getting out of this at 3.3, I'm expecting the Waka 2 help with that. It's the bright, dry hoppy right at the end. But if the kiwi, if everything else, if the wine grape's not coming through here, it's all coming through here. It's all still here, even at 3.3. There's no back sweetening on this. I drink some Belgian sours, and I wonder, as I lick my lips, like, there's a little bit of aspartame in there or something that they've done to it, and none of that's here. And you're shaking your head, so my assumption is correct on that. This really well done.
Now,
really well done.
We do fresh smoothie sours that are mostly back sweetened.
Thanks for not sending those.
Yeah, but
right.
On the sour side, sort of the only place we get close to that, we just released a beer called Hors de Chaos, very much inspired by the brewery's Melange number 3, the Ode Tart Black Tuesday blend.
Okay.
And so we blend a historic English Imperial Stout with a sour red and then pasteurize it. And that's the only time we sort of stabilize or pasteurize or sorbate the mix firm program.
Yeah. This beer you shipped me, if it was still active, it'd have been happier when I opened it. And my carpet thanks you. Now,
Just put your mouth on it. That's
we aim for about
come out my nose.
we aim for about 3 volumes of CO2, but I wish I had the guts. I've got friends who go to 4, 2. that's the kind of thing, like we overshoot a little bit sometimes because we've got different cultures and they might keep going a little. I wish I had the guts to go a little spicier, but I'd rather not have empty bottles explode.
Yeah.
Right. These are the right bottles and all, but still, you don't. It goes back to what Mike said. You can either dump your beer or dump your reputation. People don't want to pay. I think these bottles are reasonably priced. I looked at your subscription, and I thought that was fairly priced bottles. But you don't want to have half a bottle for that price. You don't want to pop it open. Yeah. But get your friends ready. Everybody get a glass out. If it's happy, we're gonna save this one. Do it over a tray, catch it. But yeah, no. I did have a question, and it's not of a whole lot of significance, but it just struck me. Are you guys trying to capture any of your CO2? Because you do use a lot of CO2 in your process. So you're purging, keeping everything O2 free, and you're even using your CO2 to agitate your hops during your dry hop. You just have an excellent CO2 contract, or are you trying to capture some and reuse some to cut some of the costs down?
No, so we're small enough that there really isn't a great option for it. We do the water push out thing, I think, is actually a great way to save CO2. So we will fill a tank with cold water, push it out to our HLT with CO2. So you're essentially just pressurizing that tank once, and then all that water is tomorrow's brew water, or it's the day after's cleaning water, or it's something else.
When I purge my kegs, I push my Star Sand out with CO2, and I'll chain it through the kegs.
Yeah. So exactly the same
crazy amounts.
And whenever we can, we'll even chain up the same move. If we've got two bright tanks to chain up, we'll push one to the other to the HLT. That isn't always an option. If you're purging out a barrel, there's really no way to push out with water. But I'll say that as a small brewery that does direct sales, the CO2 is 1% of my cost, something like
good.
that. And so it's
not the place you need to focus on cost savings.
And I agree 100% that like running extra Scott's vegan. I try to eat less meat than I would like to eat. CO2 in the environment, I think, are super serious issues. I'd like to think that people coming to a local business rather than buying beer shipped from another country on a freighter.
Oh yeah.
Honestly, I'm sure the math is it's probably better to go to the supermarket and buy Belgian beer than it is to drive an extra trip to a local brewery. Let's ignore that. It's better to buy from Walmart probably than your local farmer's market. But
I wasn't trying to say anything about CO2 footprint, so I'm sorry about that. But if you're saying that, you're getting as much as you can locally. If someone is concerned about that, you're getting and not for the sake of CO2 necessarily, but for the sake of you're trying to bring the community's worth of products into what you're making here. Well, there's no one with a lower CO2 footprint, if that's what you're concerned with, than what you're doing. So sorry I even brought it up.
And besides the carbon stuff,
it's a fair question.
Yeah, I think I would agree. And I kind of come from the same techniques, is that an extra volume of CO2 in your tank is worth its weight in gold in terms of the quality of beer you put out. And what you're trying to do is produce something that the public wants. And I think so much gets wrapped around not wasting anything. And it's like, well, we in the craft brewing community, we in the home brewing community, we have these we're small enough that these things do not become out of control costs that, like, on margins of things that we're trying to sell beer at, like tiny, it's like these things kind of, as a home brewer, and we talked about this in the Q&A last week, is like, or 2 weeks ago, or whenever you get this podcast, that I kind of run through a lot more CO2 than probably a lot of home brewers are doing, where they're trying to recycle or do things where they're not purging as much or spraying as much CO2, rousing hops during a dry hop. And for me, it's the quality is number one. I'm trying to make you the best beer I can. And if it means a couple extra tanks of CO2 per year, that's what it takes. And usually right now, there's so much cool technology going on around carbon capture, and usually CO2 is also a byproduct of some sort of oil production. So you're getting this stuff that was gonna go in the atmosphere, and now you're using it, so it ends up. I mean, what are we doing here? So, I'm on the CO2 is your friend. This is the gas that will get you the best beer that you can. So that's where I'm at.
Good stuff.
Question on that. Have you looked at, we use a little bit of nitrogen in some of our processes. Have you looked at or done anything with nitrogen to try to offset some of that CO2 usage?
Looked, I'm a jerk. They're like, it's 99.9% nitrogen. And I said, I'm working at parts per billion.
Right.
And that's kind of, that's me, that's
an oxidized beer.
Yeah, and that's exact. And if you're using that, I think there are certain points where that probably is indistinguishable.
0.1% is 1,000 ppm.
Right.
And that's,
You gotta
and
get
that's
5969.
1,000, not 10, not 5,
and
not
that's
0.1.
and that's what they're guaranteeing. It's probably better than that, but that was sort of my response to them, was just like, essentially, if it's not 100.000, which is what CO2 is, because it's a liquid and it's sublimating may not be the right word. It's evaporating.
You can
into
do it
pure
with nitrogen, but you're not going to
CO2.
sell it.
Well, they
to you
also
the same
produce
way.
CO2 from oil, so like there was no atmospheric oxygen involved in the production of the tank.
Yeah. And so and I don't know what you guys are doing, but sort of the nitrogen generator seems to be the way to go, because then you
Right.
are making your own. And we probably should have that for, say, example, after we CIP a tank, we pressurize it to keep it under pressure, to make sure it's sealed up correctly, to not let any oxygen in. That would be a perfect place for nitrogen. And we have nitrogen tanks that we use to help push our long draft lines. And there are a bunch of places where, and again, like probably filling a barrel for sour beer. If I can, the barrel is
Right.
open at the top, the bracken cane's down in there, it's purging out. 99.9% is as good or better. The barrel is porous itself.
Exactly. Staves are not a
And
perfect.
so I very much think, and that probably is something we'll invest in eventually, for certain risk, but not super high risk finished beer.
Right.
And
Yeah,
honestly,
finished CO2.
even purging the can before filling, again, 99.9% is probably good enough, because you're then, the beer foams up, that's doing purging for you.
Yeah.
It's just like maybe a bright tank or something like that, where I would trust CO2 more than I would trust nitrogen. But then we have to have separate lines, separate connections, or some way to switch it, and that's, as a place that does about 1,500 barrels a year, hasn't gotten to the point where we are. That's a pressure point for us, but it probably will be once the kitchen project is wrapped up.
And
So
for me,
as soon as-
oh, go ahead.
I was saying, as soon as we can sell the whole nitrogen generator thing, we can get Drew to design one and sell one as either a Blickman or an Anvil.
Well, my whole thing is the CO2 is a dual purpose gas. It's an oxygen purger and it's a beer finishing conditioner. Like these are things that I'm trying to do with. I don't have to have two gases. I have one gas.
Yeah.
And
As a home brewer, I'm not going to have a nitrogen tank around unless I was huge on dry stout.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have nitrogen at your house for your dry stouts? There you go.
And a creamsicle IPA, and I mean, there's a lot of fun you get with a nitro tap.
But the whole thing I've heard about that too is nitro taps. That's a percentage nitrogen, right? Like that's a blend tank where you got CO2 and nitrogen. Tank. Yeah, you're not just nitrogen. Like
so at the brewery, we have a pure nitrogen cylinder and a CO2 main line from the big tank, and then blend box.
Yeah,
right. And that's just because we've got long lines. If you pushed it 30 psi, the beer would end up being overcarbonated if you left it on.
All right, so we had planned on this first session for some takeaways, and Mike, you'd put some good notes in here. I'm going to hope we can hold this the final takeaways to the next show, because we have 2 more beers to get through, and I'm having a great time. But some people have to sleep eventually. I'll personally, I'll sleep when I'm dead, but that's me. Yeah. If you guys have anything you feel we need to wrap this show up on, please jump in. And if you're listening and there's something you want to hear in this show and you don't, that's why you're going to listen to our next show, aren't you?
I think so. I'm
All right.
listening.
So, all right. So we're going to be back very shortly, if you're listening live, to have a second show with Mike Tonsmeyer, sorry, Mike, from Sapwood Cellars. And we're going to talk about his amazing barrel program and mixed fermentation. Hope you've enjoyed this one. The next one will be better because I've got 2 beers for the next show, only 1 for the first show. I'm going to have a better second show. So you should too. Don't forget to check out our sponsors. Blickman Engineering, been here since the beginning, and every other commercial that Justin and JP insert in our breaks. These guys are the reason you get our shows for free. And we know you love our shows because they're excellent. The jokes, yes, the jokes have been slacking. We all miss Jamil. His humor is better than mine. I apologize for that. And Jamil gives me no shortage of shit when I get his texts here and there. More humor, more dick jokes. Bigger dick jokes. I can't do bigger dick jokes, Jamil. I'm limited to what I have.
My hose is only so long.
All right, everybody,
I
brew
need
strong.
more carbonation. Brew strong.